Hi class, welcome to week 4, Gender Justice. For this class, the definition of feminism we will be using is on our week 4 vocabulary list. So if you haven't read it or you want to have it up while I'm talking about this week's course, that would be probably pretty helpful for you. So while the definition is not comprehensive, it outlines some important aspects of feminism. First, there are many types of feminism. Sometimes people refer to it in the singular, but actually it's more accurate to say feminisms because feminism looks and feels differently to lots of different people. The second important aspect is that feminism is about women being people. So while this might seem intuitive now for many or most of you, for a lot of history, women were actually viewed as property rather than human beings. And that continued up until the 1800s in the United States, so it's not that distant history. And the legacy of that lives on today. And so feminism is about asserting that women are people, both in the United States and worldwide. The third important aspect is that feminism is about promoting agency for women. This means that feminism seeks to eliminate the many constraints on choice-making that society places on women. So agency is about being able to make choices with as few constraints as possible. And feminism seeks to create a world where that happens for women. The fourth important aspect is that equity and equality are goals of feminism. This is, I think, the fourth definition on your vocabulary list. And equity and equality are very different things. So this recognizes that people with female sex organs have different needs than people without them. For example, individuals with periods have different health concerns monthly, pregnancy deserves different treatment, etc. So equality would say that people with male body parts and people with female body parts have entirely the same needs, and that's not accurate. Equity says that you need to create different standards for people with different situations so that there's fairness involved. Equality and fairness are not the same thing, so you can think of equity as fairness. The fifth important aspect is that feminism encompasses social movements, political movements, and their ideologies. That means that it influences how people choose to live their everyday lives. So if you identify as a feminist, you might view a situation very differently than somebody who does not. The sixth most important aspect is that no one person gets to decide what is feminist and who is feminist. A good example of this is Megyn Kelly on Fox News. A lot of feminists who identify as radical feminists don't think that she's a feminist, but she identifies herself as one. And it's important that we think about feminism, again, as a plural thing, and that no person gets to decide who or what is feminist. So in this Intro to Feminism lecture, I'm going to give a brief overview of the history of dominant feminisms in the United States and then discuss some of the gaps that are in that history. So generally, feminism is discussed as being in 3 waves of feminism. The first wave, which is happening in the late 1800s, early 1900s, is probably what you learned about in your U.S. history classes, starting in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention in upstate New York, and culminating in women getting the right to vote in 1920. And it usually focused on equal political rights for women, so this is the suffrage movement, the right to vote for women in the United States, and that has only been around not even for 100 years yet. So there are not very many people, but there are some people who might remember what the world was like when women couldn't vote in the United States, which I think is interesting. The second wave of feminism usually focuses on cultural or social liberation for women, and you might have learned about this in history as well with Betty Friedan and the Feminine Mystique, which was written in the 1960s. This focuses on primarily the ability to work, not have to stay home with kids if you choose not to. Not even have kids if you don't want to. Sexual liberation, birth control, all of these things are part of the second wave of feminism. And then the third wave of feminism is the 1990s to present, which usually focuses on the response to the second wave feminisms and the critiques of it. And so that brings me to the issues with this history of feminism and kind of how it's framed by dominant feminism in the United States as well. So this history of feminism erases the different branches of feminism in the United States that were particular to people of color. Thus, the history of feminism becomes whitewashed to overshadow the unique experiences of women of color in the United States. So oftentimes, instead of focusing on the different grassroots movements that were happening, with especially in communities of color, with women of color, the Black Panther movement comes to mind immediately as a very feminist organization that often isn't framed as such. There, a lot of prominent individuals are named as being the markers in the feminist history within the United States, and almost all of these women are white. And this really creates a problem in the history of feminism, erasing women of color from that history when that's just not true. So this is where Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality comes in, which is one of the units, subunits of the Gender Justice Week. So this means that we all have different identities and that different identities interact uniquely with social systems that may have oppressive or dominating powers. For example, some of my identities are that I am white, I'm heterosexual, I'm a woman who was born female, I come from an immigrant family, and I grew up in the upper lower class. So my family wasn't blue collar, but we were in the lower class. We were not middle class until I was about 17. My parents didn't go to college, so I don't come from a well-educated family. And what else do I have here? And currently I'm in the lower class for income, but I'm in the top 1% for education. And so these are all things that are part of who I am. And there's other parts too, of course. I just didn't list them all. And all of these different identities mean that I experience the world in a particular way, and that structures in the United States interact with me differently than they might interact with you. So in many situations, for example, I have a lot of privilege because I am white and well-educated. But in others, being a woman means that I might be discriminated against. So all of us have different identities, and part of this unit is figuring out how they shape our daily interactions with the world around us. So I really want you to think about what identities you think are important, which ones you think are most salient. Salient just means the ones that you feel the most, or the ones that are most present in your life on a daily basis. And I also just want to talk briefly about feminist scholarship before we continue, since in our school, the School of Social Transformation, we also have a Women and Gender Studies program, and feminist scholarship is perhaps one of the most important things to come out of the feminist movement and the feminist history in the United States. And the definition that I like the best of feminist scholarship and what its goals are from one of my favorite feminist scholars. Her name is Chandra Mohanty, and she is from India. And she wrote that feminist scholarship is, quote, the relationship between woman, so W-O-M-A-N, a cultural and ideological composite, other, constructed through diverse representational discourses, so these are scientific, literary, judicial, linguistic, cinematic, etc., and women, W-O-M-E-N, real material subjects of their collective histories, is one of the central questions the practice of feminist scholarship seeks to address. So she's basically saying that feminist scholarship looks at the interaction between woman, so the individual woman, which is a construct that is made by various systems or institutions in the society in which we live. So these constructions of what a woman is could be constructed by science, literature, law, language, popular culture, all sorts of things on what a woman is or means to different societies. And so feminist scholarship looks at what that is and then puts it in conversation with women, plural, which are real material subjects of their collective histories. So that's the reality of what it means to be a woman or be part of this woman group in a society. And I think that's important. So if any of you are interested in feminist scholarship, I really encourage you to read Chandra Mohanty's work, Under Western Eyes. If you read that and write a one-page response, you can get extra credit for that. So I hope that you enjoy this unit, and of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.